Dear friends, English literature, romantic poetry, selected poems of John Keats. On first looking into Chapman's Homer, brief questions with answers. Brief questions 1 to 47. Question 1. What is a sonnet? Answer. A sonnet is a 14-line iambic poem in iambic pentameter with a special arrangement of the rhymes. Question 2. What is the origin of the term sonnet and what does it mean? Answer. The term sonnet has come from the Italian sonetto, meaning a little sound or song. Question 3. When and where did the sonnet originate? Answer. The sonnet originated in Italy in the 13th century. Question 4. Who invented sonnet? Answer. Most probably, sonnet was invented in Italy by Dante, 1265 to 1321, who wrote a number of sonnets to his lady love, Laura. Question 5. Who brought sonnets in England and when? Answer. Sir Thomas Watt, 1503 to 1542, and the Earl of Surrey, Henry Howard, 1516 to 1547, introduced sonnets into English poetry in the third decade of the 16th century. Question 6. How many are the types of sonnets? Answer. Sonnets are of 4 types. Question 7. What are the types of sonnets? Answer. The types of sonnets are: number A, Italian or Petrarchan; number B, Spenserian; number C, Shakespearean or English; and number 4, Miltonic. Question 8. What is the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet? Answer. A lyrical poem of 14 lines divided into 2 parts, octave and sestet, is called an Italian or Petrarchan sonnet. Question 9. What is the rhyme scheme of the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet? Answer. The rhyme scheme of the octave is A B B A, A B B A, and that of sestet is varied. Question 10. What is an octave? Answer. An octave is the first 8 lines of the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet. Question 11. What is stated in the octave of the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet? And so the octave usually takes a question or states a generalization that is answered or resolved in the sestet. Question 12. What is sestet? And so the second part of an Italian or Petrarchan sonnet consisting of 6 lines is called sestet. Question 13. Name some variant rhyme scheme of the sestet of the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet. Answer. CDC, CDC, or CDE, CDE, or CD, CD, ED, etc. Question 14. What type of sonnet is on first looking into Chapman's Homer? Answer. On first looking into Chapman's Homer follows the model of the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet. Question 15. To whom does Keats pay tribute in On First Looking into Chapman's Homer? Answer. In On First Looking into Chapman's Homer, Keats pays a glowing tribute to Chapman, but more than that, he pays tribute to Homer's poetic genius. Question 16. Who was Chapman? Answer. Chapman, 1559 to 1634, was a poet and a dramatist of the Elizabethan age. Question 17. Why does Keats pay a tribute to Chapman? Answer. Keats pays a tribute to Chapman because he became able to read Homer's poetry only through Chapman's translation of Homer into English. Question 18. Why was Keats unable to read great epics of Homer? Answer. Homer's epics were written in Greek. Keats did not know the Greek language, so he was unable to read Homer's epics in Greek. Question 19. Who was Homer? Answer. Homer was a Greek epic poet. Question 20. Name 2 famous epics written by Homer. Answer. 2 famous epics written by Homer were the Iliad and the Odyssey. Question 21. When did Chapman publish his translation of Homer's poetry? Answer. Chapman published his translation of Homer's poetry in 1596. Question 22. When did Keats first read Chapman's translation of Homer into English? Answer. Keats first read Chapman's translation of Homer into English in 1815. Question 23. What gives Keats the original ideas about his poetry, about Homer's poetry? Answer. Chapman's translation of Homer into English gives kids the original ideas about Homer's poetry? Question 24. Who helps kids to come upon Chapman's translation of Homer? Answer. Kids' friend, Cowden Clark, helps him to come upon Chapman's translation of Homer into English. Question 25. How does kids experience new sensation? Answer. Kids experiences new sensations by reading Chapman's translation of Homer into English. Question 26. What is described as the realms of gold? Answer. Literature is metaphorically described as the realms of gold on first looking into Chapman's Homer. Question 27. Which does kids compare literature to? Answer. Kids compares literature to countries, states, and kingdoms. Question 28. What is kids reading like? Answer. Kids reading is like traveling in different countries and states. Question 29. What is meant by the realms of gold? Answer. The realms of gold stands for the golden world of poetry. Question 30. Cite an example of hyperbaton or inversion from On First Looking into Chapman's Homer. Answer. As much I traveled in the realms of gold. Question 31. What is hyperbaton or inversion? Answer. Hyperbaton or inversion is a figure in which the grammatical order of words in a sentence is inverted for the sake of rhetorical effect. Question 32. What is meant by the line "and many goodly states and kingdoms seen"? Answer. The line means that kids had read the accounts of many states and kingdoms of good quality. Question 33. And many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Identify the figure used in the line. The figure used in the line is catachresis, in which a word is wrongly used in a sense that does not belong to it. In the line, the word seen is used in the sense of read. Question 34. What is meant by the line, "Round many western islands have I seen"? Answer. It means that kids had read the poetry of western authors, that is, of Britain. Question 35. What is Apollo? Answer. Apollo is the god of poetry. Poets composed their poems under the inspiration of Apollo. Question 36. Out of one wide expanse had I been told. What is kids been told about? Answer. Kids has been told about the huge mass of poetry written by Homer. Question 37. How is Homer presented in the sonnet On First Looking into Chapman's Homer? Answer. In On First Looking into Chapman's Homer, Homer is presented with deep brow or high forehead. Question 38. What is meant by deep browed Homer? Answer. Homer has deep brow or high forehead. Question 39. What does the deep brow or high forehead of Homer signify? Answer. Homer's deep brow and a high forehead signifies his great intellectual capacity. Question 40. What is the meaning of the word demesne? Answer. Demesne means a region or large area of land. On First Looking into Chapman's Homer, the word is used to mean domain. Question 41. To what does Keats compare his excitement felt on reading Chapman's translation of Homer into English? Answer. Keats compares his excitement to that of an astronomer while he discovers a new planet, and that of Curtis while he discovers the Pacific Ocean. Question 42. What is the watcher of the skies? Answer. Astronomer is the watcher of the skies. Question 43. Who was Curtis? Answer. Hernan Cortes was a famous Spanish adventurer of the 16th century. He conquers Mexico in 1519. Question 44. Who discovered the Pacific Ocean? Answer. Balboa discovered the Pacific Ocean, but on first looking into Chapman's Homer, Cortes was wrongly believed as the discoverer of the Pacific Ocean. Question 47. What is Darien? Answer. Darien is the older name of the Isthmus of Panama. Question 46. What does Keats confound in on first looking into Chapman's homework? Answer. In on first looking into Chapman's homework, it confounds Curtis with Balboa. Question 47. What is the rhyme scheme of on first looking into Chapman's homework? Answer. A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D, C, D. Thank you friends for watching my video.